George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
A biblical slaughter is underway in Palestine, in Gaza, in East Jerusalem, and in the West Bank, closely followed by other horsemen of the apocalypse. The risk of fatal epidemic of disease is now a major threat to the health and the well-being of millions of people whose responsibility is ours as the international community over an illegally, militarily occupied territory. And a biblical famine is close on the heels of that, as the Palestinian people, 60% of whose homes have been destroyed, 75% of whom are now displaced people, again, inside their own tiny concentration camp called the Gaza Strip. Mass murder on the West Bank. Hundreds have been murdered by settlers and soldiers in the West Bank of the River Jordan. And the Western politicians are recklessly pursuing it, even to the detriment of their own prospects of re-election. Oh, and terrorism is beginning to break out in Europe as furious, maniacal terrorists stab people in Western capitals. Well, I'm not sure there's any good news after that, but we'll try to analyze, dive deep, so that you at least understand what's happening and why. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Mind you, the fighting is going both ways. Very substantial losses have been incurred by the Israel invasion force inside Gaza. Video has emerged, but not on your mainstream television screen, of up to 70 dead Israeli soldiers caught in an ambush by Palestinian fighters defending the benighted Gaza Strip. And the Yemeni Ansar Allah are fighting the Israeli naval and other civilian shipping going through the Red Sea. There are reports tonight, in fact, that an American warship has been hit by the army of the Free People of the Yemen, and that a British warship has been damaged. That's not confirmed, but what is confirmed is that 2 Israeli ships were successfully attacked by Ansarullah naval and ground batteries, firing upon them in the Red Sea. Drones, even a cruise missile, have been deployed against that shipping. It will shortly be impossible for Israeli shipping anywhere in the Red Sea, still less in the Straits of Hormuz. The insurance costs will balloon. The economic punishment being suffered by the people of Israel as their economy tanks as a result of this massive mobilization of 165,000 Israeli reservists, and the cost, despite the benefaction of the United States and others, is growing, and not just growing in terms of cash. I have to make this point to you. It's a melancholy task, but only 2% of the Israeli public think that the Israeli armed forces are going too far in Gaza. In fact, fewer than 2%, 1.8% to be exact. Most of those polled believe that Israel should be hitting Gaza harder. And the middle strata, in Israeli opinion, is that they're getting it just about right. Ergo, do not think for 1 minute that this biblical Old Testament slaughter is going to be stopped by the people of Israel. Don't think that by removing Netanyahu, you will solve this problem. I'm sorry that that's the case. I wish it were otherwise. But if you read, as I do religiously, Gideon Levy in the Haaretz newspaper, you know just how bleak the situation is amongst the Israeli public. And no amount of international opprobrium, even hatred, mounting all over the world is going to move them. We've got a poll running. What would stop Israel from continuing this slaughter? And it's actually fairly evenly divided between ethnic cleansing, genocide, and an order from Biden. So I'm going to concentrate on Biden and on Rishi Sunak and on Sir Keir Starmer and on the other European leaders, without whose support this could not be happening. If we cannot look to the Israeli public to bring it to an end, we have to look to our own governments and therefore our own public if this is going to stop, short of ethnic cleansing, short of genocide. I'll have something to say in a moment about the prospects of ethnic cleansing and the prospects of genocide. But let me just begin to count the cost for us and for our leaders. Terrorist outrages are beginning to occur. One appears to be underway in the city of Paris right at this minute. Others are reported from Dublin and many other places around Europe. I want to ask our leaders and their mouthpieces in the mass media, just how radical do you think Muslims in Western countries are feeling right now? You spent billions on de-radicalization, on prevent, on a whole panoply of schemes to try and draw the sting out of the hatred that existed in Muslim communities after the Iraq War, most of which miserably failed and were poorly targeted, even more poorly executed. But just how radicalized do you think young Muslims in Britain, in France, in the United States are feeling right now? As they see, as we see. And they see it almost to a man and a woman. Many of our people, it would appear, completely ignore, turn the page, walk by on the other side of the road, but no Muslim in the West is doing that. Not a single Muslim in any of our countries is anything other than acutely aware of the horrific genocidal carnage which has been unleashed over the last 57 days. We may think that they are somehow unmoved by 6,800 children being slaughtered, and not just quietly euthanized, not put to sleep, but being ripped apart, their limbs torn from them, their heads decapitated. All of that is available online, as it needs to be, and every Muslim has seen it. So, in those circumstances, what do you expect to happen in the course of this and in the aftermath of this? I have spent my life trying to provide a democratic alternative to the siren voices of extremism and radicalism that are there on the rocks of the Muslim community, seeking, like sirens, to draw people onto those rocks. I'm beginning to feel that I wasted my time, that I wasted my breath, because when push comes to shove, our governments are perfectly happy to slaughter Muslims abroad in the interests of the empire, in the interests of the sentinel of the empire, otherwise known as the State of Israel. How else can you explain? There's a statement out from the Palestinian resistance this evening attacking Britain. Why? Because the Royal Air Force has now admitted that it is flying reconnaissance missions over the Gaza Strip and handing the intelligence thereby gained directly to the Israeli military. This is an act of war by the people of Balfour, by the people who authored this catastrophe in the first place. So Britain has joined the war. The United States has been in the war from day one. There's no hiding place from that. And so our government has made our country and our people a target for retribution, for terrorist attack and harm to our people, even though our people were never consulted about our government's action. We did not authorize the use of our base in Cyprus for an endless shuttle of military traffic from Cyprus to Tel Aviv. We did not authorize. Parliament was not even told that the Royal Air Force had now directly entered the war with these reconnaissance overflights on behalf of the Israeli armed forces. But our people will be the ones who pay the price, because terrorism targets not the guilty men. Terrorism targets soft targets, innocent people. I was the Member of Parliament for the Royal London Hospital, for the Aldgate East Underground Station. I was there and saw the broken and bloodied and murdered victims of the horrific terrorist attacks in 2005, 7/7/2005. I saw the doctors and nurses running around, their uniforms, their tunics, their aprons, running with blood as a result of these terrorist outrages that took place that day. That's the era that we have now re-entered as a result, not just of our Prime Minister, but of our leader of the opposition. I'll turn to the United States in just a minute. But one of the extraordinary things when the history of this comes to be written is the reckless abandon with which our leaders have deserted not only our own people and their safety, but their own electoral prospects. Who's going to vote for Keir Starmer in the London mayoral election? Who's going to vote for Keir Starmer in more than 50 constituencies across Britain, with a number of Muslims alone, never mind all the other people who are devastated by what is happening? Who's going to vote for Keir Starmer? Why has he done this? Why has he committed what might turn out to be electoral suicide? To prove just how unequivocal his devotion to Zionism and to Israel is? What kind of politics is this? We're used to politicians that don't care about us. We've now got politicians that don't even care about their own prospects of being elected. Maybe they think there are no alternatives to voting for them. But I'm here to assure them that there definitely, absolutely will be alternatives in those constituencies and in the London mayoral election. Joe Biden has committed political suicide with this. He was already on a very sticky wicket trying to defeat Donald Trump, but he has thrown away tens and tens and tens of areas of the United States where people are burning mad at what the United States is doing and arming and funding and facilitating in every way these grotesque crimes that we are all now seeing more or less live, more or less in real time. We can see the children wailing as they see the bodies of their mothers and their fathers, parents wailing, rending their garments as they see the bodies of their own children. We can see the people still trapped under the rubble. Of the 1,000 who were killed in the last 36 hours, most of them are under the rubble, and many of them will never be able to be dug up from the rubble. So dangerous is the situation for rescue workers, for medical teams. They had to abandon their efforts yesterday to try and rescue. People just were left to bleed out and die. Well, there's a new campaign launched today called Abandon Biden. And I'm sorry if you're a supporter of the Democratic Party, but your goose is cooked. You are toast. You are a dead parrot. Joe Biden will never be re-elected as a result of the conduct of his government in this catastrophe. The state of Michigan will be a landslide against Joe Biden. There are millions of Muslims in America, almost all of whom used to vote for the Democratic Party, but no more. And there are millions of others in America, non-Muslims, who cannot stomach this slaughter any longer. And I'm one of them. For the first time tonight, I reposted a scene that I could not myself personally watch. For the first time, I just couldn't take it anymore. But the fact that I didn't watch it doesn't wipe from my memory what is happening, and it will not be wiping yours. So Joe Biden and Keir Starmer have committed political suicide. Why? In support of Israel? A small country, thousands of miles away, with a population of 7 million? What does Israel have on these people? Is that what it is? I cannot fathom why Biden and Starmer have done what they have done. There's no votes in it. There's no money in it. Israel doesn't give people money. Israel takes money from people. So if there's no votes in it and no money in it, why are these hirelings, these political prostitutes who are up for the highest bidder ordinarily, why are they doing this? They're going to pay a high price, just like the European economies have paid a high price for a war in Ukraine that they now admit they have lost. The rivals of President Zelensky are queuing up to give interviews about how he is finished. His own wife said she doesn't want him to run again for another term as president. Another term as president? He'll be lucky to get out of Ukraine alive. Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, accused him yesterday of having turned the Ukraine into a tyranny, a dictatorship. Klitschko says the question is not whether Zelensky will survive, but whether Ukraine will continue to exist at the end of all this. Arestovich and others that were in the negotiations in Turkey have testified that a peace deal was there on the table, ready to be signed, acceptable to the Ukrainian negotiators, until Boris Johnson, bringing a message, no doubt, from Joe Biden, told them that we must fight on. Of course, Boris Johnson never fought anybody in his puff, maybe his fag at Eton, but no more than that. Boris Johnson told the Ukrainians to fight to the last drop of their blood, and that last drop is almost upon us. Ukraine is now sending not just women to the front line, but pregnant women to the front line. One of them was pictured this week being rescued and tended to by Russian soldiers when she fell into their hands, visibly pregnant and in uniform and with a weapon. Half of the mobilizable males in the Ukraine have fled the country and are living as refugees if they're poor and living the life of kings in Marbella and other flesh pots around Europe if they've got money, if their fathers are in the Ukrainian elite. Suicide it was. Germany has committed political and economic suicide for Joe Biden. What's the explanation for that? What's the explanation for the fact that you will now be arrested on the streets of Berlin for wearing a keffiyeh? It is now a criminal offense in Berlin so to do. We showed you last week outside the town hall in Berlin, there's an Israeli flag, 4 Ukrainian flags, and 1 German flag. What's the reason for this national suicide that our countries and our leaders seem busily embarked upon? I don't know. I'm not a psychologist. I couldn't begin to analyze it. Sometimes I have the darkest possible thoughts that it's all deliberate. They want our societies to collapse into violence and disarray, that they want hostility on our own streets. Maybe they even want the kind of terrorist attacks that are beginning now to break out in Europe. But I don't know, because I can't work out what conceivably could be the reason for this political suicide, for this national suicide. All I know is this. We've only got roughly 1 political freedom left. And that political freedom is the freedom to vote. And if you vote these criminals back in again, frankly, we deserve everything that's going to be coming our way. You have to take they said that 1848 was the year of revolutions. 2024 is the year of elections. There are elections everywhere in 2024. In Britain, in the United States, and around the European continent. We have to take this opportunity. It's our last chance. It's our last chance to stop these people in their tracks. And if we don't take it, then it's good night, Irene, for Western countries, for Western society. We'll be talking to 2 top guests this evening. Arab Barghouthi, a great hit when he appeared here a few weeks ago, the son of Palestine's national hero, Nelson Mandela of Palestine, Marwan Barghouthi. Arab Barghouthi is his son. He has nothing to do with Hamas. He has everything to do with resistance to the calamity that has befallen all of his country and all of his people. And I, for one, look forward to hearing from him. And we'll be talking to the brightest star that has arisen amongst the firmament of stars on social media from the United States, the one and only Jackson Hinkle. So fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night because this is the mother of all talk shows. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding. All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Okay, there's a poll running. Will Israel stop at A, ethnic cleansing, B, genocide, C, an order from Biden? You can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. You can vote on my Twitter account, beware of imitations, the blue tick with 630,000 followers or so. On the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. And if you're watching us on the YouTube stream, indeed, if you're watching us on Facebook, if you're watching us on any platform which allows you to share with your friends and associates that this show is on now and it's talking about very important things that matter to them, then please share now. The phone numbers, if you're in Britain or Ireland, it's entirely free of charge, remember. It's 08081 965522. That's 08081 965522. If you're in the United States or Canada, equally free of charge. Toll free, +1 844 944 3344. That's +1 844 944 3344. And if you're anywhere else in the world, the number is 0044 203 966 2625. You can also email the show at onair@moats.tv. And as usual, Gayatri will be bringing us a social media roundup in the second hour. Arab Barghouthi is, as I said earlier, from one of the leading families of resistance to Israeli occupation and aggression, of endless war and massacre, and he is one of the most eloquent voices that we could possibly find in Palestine to talk about what's happening. Arab Barghouthi, welcome back to the mother of all talk shows. Let's start with, if we can, the extent to which this assault, this crazed assault on Gaza and in the West Bank is being opposed. I talked earlier about substantial losses suffered by the Israeli armed forces. And I've seen footage from Jenin, from Jericho, of Palestinians resisting the ethnic cleansing that's going on in the West Bank. Paint that picture for us, if you will.
Well, thank you so much, George, for having me again. And I think to start with, the Israeli government is clearly using the fact that everyone is busy with their slaughtering and massacres and genocide in Gaza to use that to do whatever they want in the West Bank. In the West Bank, things are getting worse every single day. In Jenin, we saw the raid of Jenin refugee camp and of Jenin city, and killing left, right, and center people. We saw the killing of children in the West Bank. We saw the detention of the mass detention and the arbitrary arrest of thousands of people since October the 7th in the West Bank, because I think the Israeli government is very clear about what they're doing against the Palestinians. They tried to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians in Gaza, and that didn't succeed because Egypt did not accept to open the borders. So they started with the genocide, and they thought that since the whole world is busy with Gaza, let us just complete our mission of the West Bank, because this is a project that has been happening for decades now. If you look at the settlements of the Israelis inside the West Bank, it's a clear proof that the Israeli government's purpose is to control the whole West Bank and to steal the land of the Palestinians and the Palestinian territories on the 67 borders. And I think it's worth mentioning that everyone is talking about Hamas Charter, everyone is talking about their mentality, but no one is talking about the Likud Charter. The Likud Charter says clearly that there is no hope for a Palestinian state. They don't accept a Palestinian state. They don't accept our presence. The best that they can do is to let us just live inside the West Bank until they solve our problem, because we are a problem. They look at us as subhumans, as you know. And the last escalations in the West Bank is big proof. Just last night, they arrested 60 people. 5 of them were women, and many of them were children. And most of these people, they go to prison and they're not charged. No, they don't go to court, which is illegal by international law. And we agreed the last time that the Israeli slogan is illegal by international law, because the international law does not mean anything to them. And to be honest, it doesn't mean anything to us. I don't want to hear anyone speaking about international law, because it really doesn't make any difference, George. And we've seen that from the Israelis.
I supported the Oslo agreement, but maybe we can dispose of that in a sentence. It's dead now, isn't it?
I mean, if you talk to the young generation, they despise everyone who contributed into the Oslo Accords. I think that that's because we have been played by the Israelis in the Oslo Accords. Because what happened is that we agreed on something, then they killed their prime minister who agreed on that, which is Ishaq Rabin, which is a war criminal. But to be honest, he meant it when he wanted to give the Palestinians our own state. But it's dead now. And it's dead because in 96, if you remember, Netanyahu came into power for the first time as a prime minister. And he started with his a long project of building settlements to kill the two-state solution. So I don't think that there is a two-state solution anymore. If you look at the map and see how, the cities of the West Bank, like Ramallah and Bethlehem and all these cities, they made us think that we are the settlements in the Israeli land, not the other way around. They completely controlled 60 to 70% of the land, and they have security control of the rest of the land. So I don't think there is any hope for the two-state solution anymore, except if you pressure the Israeli government to withdraw totally from the West Bank, the settlements, the checkpoints, the military occupation, and to open the prison of Gaza. Otherwise, there is no hope for any two-state solution.
And on the principle that a surgeon cannot operate on his own foot, and given the opinion poll figures that I gave at the beginning of the show, where 1.8% of the people in Israel think that Israel is going too far in Gaza. 1.8%. In fact, the largest number think that it's not going far enough. You cannot expect any of that to come from Israel. Therefore, it can only come from the world leaders who are making these crimes possible. Isn't that right?
The Western governments are totally complicit in what's happening. And to be honest, I'm not shocked. I want to say I'm shocked, but I'm not shocked by the numbers. Because if you look at the Israeli history of politics, we have never had an Israeli prime minister that has been voted for that doesn't have a record of war crimes. All of them. If you look at Ariel Sharon, Ehud Barak, Netanyahu, Ishaq Rabin, Shimon Peres, they all have blood on their hands. Palestinian children, blood on their hands. And I think that the Israeli people, unfortunately, enabled their leaders to feed them all the lies and the brainwash that they are getting about the Palestinians. They all think that the Palestinians are the problem. They think that we want to kill them. They think all of these crazy things that I think you can see that they are familiar to the apartheid regime of South Africa, of the Irish people, of every single oppressed people that has been in history. Because what you do is that you feed them with lies, you feed them with fear, you let them fear the other side, you dehumanize the other side to the point where you have less than 2%, as you mentioned, say that killing thousands and thousands of children in 2 months is not too is too far. Only 2%. Like you have 98% of the Israeli people that think that it's okay to kill children, it's okay to kill women, because their safety and their security comes from that. But if they learn anything from history, the violence cycle will never end by that. It will never end by violence. It will end only by political solutions and by giving the Palestinian people our own state and our own independence. And that's how we will give them their security. Without that, we will keep resisting, because it's only a human nature to resist the oppression.
Let's look then at the other alternatives. Ethnic cleansing of Gaza and of the West Bank require both Egypt and Jordan to absorb the huge numbers, millions of Palestinians into their own states, in the Egyptian case, into the desert of Sinai. And secondly, it depends on the Palestinians actually going, leaving, running away, as happened in the original Nakba. Now, I don't think that either of those two possibilities is there. I don't think Egypt or Jordan could afford to open their gates for refugees, millions of refugees, and I don't think that the Palestinians would agree to flee to these two countries. What's your view on that?
My view is very clear, and I think the brave people of Gaza has made it very clear, which is, if we have two options, to die on our land or to leave, we're going to die on our land. And that's not an option. If you look at the Nakba and what happened in 1948 and the displacement of 700,000 people, they are now 7 million people. And most of them are living in a very harsh conditions in many countries, in refugee camps and all of that. And they have no right to return. And this is the most important point, because if we don't have a right to return to Palestine, I'm sure that Palestinians will feel that we have nothing to live for. What's the purpose of life if we can't live in our homeland that have been our home for centuries and centuries? And I think that it's only arrogant, it's a white supremacist mentality, it's a colonial mentality to even discuss the displacement of the Palestinian people. They should be apologizing for the Palestinians for what they have been doing to us and the oppression that has been practiced on us, rather than to suggest such ironic suggestions. It's not going to happen. We're not leaving, even if anyone opens the borders. I don't think the Egyptians nor the Jordanians or any other country will open the borders, because that would be the assassination of the Palestinian cause. And this cause will never die. We're staying in our land, and we will have our freedom and our independence one day.
Give my salam to your parents. Thank you for joining us again. Arab Barghouthi, speaking on behalf of the Palestinian people. Would that he was allowed to do so on the so-called mainstream media. Lots of support for the Barghouthis on YouTube. Nadia says, "We love you, Barghouthi, and your entire family." Pittsburgh Dude 87 says, "I feel so sad for this young man growing up without his father. May his father be released as soon as possible." Let me take a quick break, and then it's your calls right up to the hour. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiling, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain. Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a Holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely.
The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
That film, The Killings of Tony Blair, it's particularly apposite right at this moment, in my view. He's the former peace envoy to the Middle East, you may recall, by joining me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. More comments from YouTube. Natural Person says, I want to thank George Galloway for providing this show each and every week. The show lets me know that humanity and compassion still exists. Thank you for that. Babil says, ICC wimp prosecutor didn't visit Gaza or speak to Palestinian victims. Quite true. Where are you, Mr. Khan? What is it about you that means that you are blind, deaf and dumb in the face of these atrocities? Let's hear from London, from Khaled on Israel-Palestine. Go ahead, Khaled.
Hi, George.
Hi.
As a Palestinian that grew up in Jordan and now lives in London, I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for the amazing work you've been doing in the name of justice and for fighting for the press and the Palestinians specifically for decades and decades.
Thank you, sir.
We really appreciate it, and many Palestinians I know in London absolutely adore you. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask you about the current public opinion in Israel. Before the exchange of hostages last week, it seemed like there was a divide in public opinion of those that wanted at least a temporary ceasefire that prioritized the release of the hostages, and those that are calling for continued relentless bombardment and genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. Given you mentioned you read the Israeli newspapers, and one of the polls suggests that only 2% are now for a ceasefire, would love to get your perspectives on the evolution of Israeli opinion. Do you see at any point in the near future where maybe it becomes more clear that the military objectives set out by Netanyahu and his government are unachievable if the sort of barbaric murderous shelling continues, and that Israeli public opinion will pivot towards more of a pro-ceasefire and sort of see what we see, which is the best way to protect Israelis is by treating Palestinians like fellow human beings that have the same privileges and freedoms as Israelis? And another question that's related is, do you feel like the last 2 months get us closer or further to the idea of one country, a dream and vision that you always talk about, a holy land with equal rights for all?
Well, big questions, of course. Let me deal with the one that's easier to answer, the first part of what you said, and I'm grateful for the kind words. The Gideon Levy, the greatest Israeli writer, in Haaretz, the only newspaper in Israel worthy of the name, with all its faults, said today that Israel has abandoned its hostages and decided to go for broke. And that's what they are now doing. They have dramatically stepped up the killing, which was already at a genocidal level. But 1,000 dead civilians in 36 hours, after the Americans have supposedly told them that they want them to avoid the level of civilian casualties that there already was, means either that the American government is lying, which I happen to think they are, but whether they are or they aren't, Israel arrogantly responded to their public call for more care to be taken by more recklessly bombarding civilian areas. They killed 600 people in a refugee camp, in Jabalia refugee camp, which I know well. And as I've told you before, I owned a house that I called Jabalia in honor of the wonderful people of that refugee camp. 600 were killed there. 1,000 dead civilians, most of them children and women, very clear majority of the 1,000 new corpses, represents a dramatic escalation in the mass murder. Israel withdrew its Mossad delegation from Qatar, where they were negotiating over the issue of hostages, and they've clearly now abandoned their hostages. Even though the British are up there flying over Gaza, supposedly trying to locate hostages, Netanyahu has just made it clear that he cares nothing for the hostages, that he intends to kill as many Palestinians as possible, or to use that incredible Nazi phrase that was used by one of his close associates, or his wife's close associate, just the other day, that they intend to thin out the Gaza population as much as possible. Thin out human beings, men, women, and children. So I am working on the assumption that they hope that their apparently irresistible force will break the apparently immovable object of the Palestinian refusal to stampede to the Rafah gate and force the Egyptians to open that gate and let them go and live in the desert for the next few generations. I'm thinking that they're betting on that. I think it's a losing bet, and I think, as I said at the beginning, that the cost that they are beginning to pay in their own military casualties. Don't forget, Israel only has about 40,000 professional soldiers. All the rest are drafted. All the rest are people that would rather be on the beach. All the rest are people that are only there for the beer, so to speak. But they are being sent into a military cauldron in which they are now beginning to be very badly burned. I don't know the veracity of the numbers, but one of the Palestinian resistance organizations said that they killed upwards of 63 Israeli soldiers yesterday. And I've seen video which definitely shows that they killed a lot, but whether it's 63 or not, I don't know. They also claimed that some of those they killed were Americans. Well, of course, a lot of Israelis are actually Americans, but whether they were American soldiers or mercenaries, again, I can't vouch for that. But the rockets are still coming from Gaza. Tel Aviv was bombarded. Hezbollah, the Lebanese resistance movement, have tied down at least 2 divisions, in the best divisions of the Israeli armed forces in the north, because they very greatly fear an invasion of the north from Lebanon, from the Lebanese resistance. So they are losing. They've got 150,000 settlers in the north who've abandoned their settlements and who are now a burden on the Israeli exchequer. They've mobilized 165,000 reserves, and they're not now going to work. They're now an economic burden on the Israeli exchequer. The shekel is at its lowest level in 15 years, and it will fall far, far lower in the days and weeks to come, I predict. So your point, I think, is that Israeli opinion may begin to turn as the cost-benefit analysis begins to become more clear. That's a real possibility. But a lot of Palestinian dead bodies will have to be mounted in a growing mountain of corpses before that equation begins to change. Which is why the burden of my remarks at the beginning of the show was aimed at the Western politicians who could stop it, irrespective of what the Israeli public opinion is. If Biden said stop right now, as was done in the Suez Crisis in 1956, Britain, France, Israel invaded Egypt. until the United States told them to stop. And they had to stop. And actually, America's in an even more powerful position now, vis-a-vis the state of Israel, than it was even then. Biden has to tell it to stop. The European Union, which actually trades more with Israel than the United States does, and admits Israel into every and all European institution, sporting, cultural, economic, political. The European Union, Britain, and the United States have the power to stop this genocide now, before it's joined by epidemic and by famine. The horsemen of the apocalypse, war, famine, and disease are stalking this tiny piece of land. When I hear people talking about in the north of the Gaza Strip, in the south of the Gaza Strip, we're talking about a place that is 3.5 miles wide and 25 miles long from one end to the other. The Palestinians were told to evacuate to the south, and now they are leveling the south. They've been told to evacuate again. To where? Into the sea? Thank you for your call and for the opportunity to expand on what I had to say. Dennis is on the line in Texas on the same subject. Go ahead, Dennis.
Hi, George. Yeah, my introduction when I called your representative was it's Putin's fault. And there's a reason for that. Rather than give Syria his best anti-air weapons, S-400s and so on, he gave them to, or sold them to Turkey, which is a NATO ally. Now, Trump bombed a Syrian airbase on the fake pretext of chemical weapons used by the Assad regime, Assad government, I should say, not regime, I don't think. And if Syria had been provided with anti-ship missiles, anti-air missiles, they could have retaliated against those ships. And what I think is that Russia, Putin, is a little bit reticent that America's going to nuke everybody, and therefore their bluff can never be called. If you don't call that bluff, you might as well stick your arms up and give up, because they'll just carry on pushing these red lines, which they did several times, further and further back, waiting for a response. They didn't get a lackluster response or no response, and so they keep pushing the red lines further back. Therefore, if one or two American small ships have been sunk in the Mediterranean at this time, then they might be reluctant now to threaten Hezbollah, which I'm sure is dying to respond to the atrocity in Gaza and also the West Bank. And they can't, because they're not allowed to do it anymore, to do it at all. I mean,
well, look, it's not a great line. In fact, I thought you were the most Scottish-sounding Texan I'd ever heard. But I take my hat off to the quality of your analysis, which is absolutely accurate. But be careful what you wish for. If Putin is being reticent, it's because he doesn't want a world war to break out over a tiny piece of land on the Mediterranean involving a few millions of people in the middle of a genocidal attack by 7 million people. Putin is conscious of the fact there are 7 or 8 billion humans on the planet, and as one of the most important leaders on the planet, he has a responsibility to try and avoid World War III, but it might come to that. It might come to exactly what you say. I believe, no one's told me this, neither in Syria nor in Russia, but I believe that Syria is a red line for Russia. That if Israel launches an all-out attack on Syria, Russia will join the war. I don't believe that they could sacrifice their ally of more than 50 years standing to this catastrophe that's unfolding around us. I don't believe that Iran could stand idly by if the Lebanese resistance and the people of Lebanon were subject to an all-out attack by Israel, backed by Western warships. And Syria has all those missiles that you adumbrated. Hezbollah has all those missiles that you listed there. And so when you see the Ansarullah in Yemen able to paralyze shipping in the Red Sea, Iran or its friends in Iraq can paralyze shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, and then you're talking about a 1973 style oil price hike that will devastate what's left of Western economies. The capacity of this thing to get out of control, to spread regionally and internationally, is very considerable. And the one you didn't mention, the dog that didn't bark, the shoe that didn't drop, is China. China one day will exercise its strength on the international stage, not least because it knows that the empire has plans for them further down the line. So China may well say, we'd rather fight you in the Mediterranean when most of the world's public opinion would be on our side than to have to fight them in the Straits of Taiwan or in the South China Sea. If I was a Chinese leader, I'll tell you what I'd do right now. I would sail a giant hospital ship into the port of Gaza, and I would defy Netanyahu to attack me. I would defy the Israeli armed forces to attack a hospital ship with a big red cross on it sailing into the port in Gaza. And I would open the doors of that hospital ship, and I would treat the wounded and the sick that have been abandoned, that have been their hospitals decimated, their sewage system decimated, their food supply decimated, the supply of water decimated, and therefore epidemic of all kinds of diseases is only days, maybe hours away from breaking out. If I were China, that's what I'd do. And if Israel attacked a Chinese hospital ship, we'd be in a whole new ballgame. Thanks, Dennis, for the call. YouTube comments, Babel again. All private owners of NGOs, donors, private and government need to do a class action lawsuit on the Israeli government. Well, good luck. I'm not against it, but I'm with Arab Barghouthi. I've concluded quite some time ago, if I'm being honest, that there's no such thing as international law. It is lipstick on the pig, on the war pigs. That's all. Shannon Fontaine says, Gigi, YouTube is messing with your live viewing time. Share, share, share. Fight the censorship. Yes, I said in the last show that we are now, as soon as we began to touch 3 million viewers per week, all or part, clips or stream, on all of our platforms, we never got over that 3 million mark. Once we got over it. Now we're just under it. It's as if someone somewhere, algorithm or a human, have decided that we've gotten too big for our boots. So let's beat the censorship. Follow us on all platforms. Follow us on Rumble, which is the safest of all the platforms. But if you're watching on the other platforms, share, share, share. Thank you for that. Bob Cosmic says, it's wide enough for 2 ships to sail betwixt each other when the Ben Gurion Canal is completed, taking $9 billion out of the pockets of Egypt. Think about it. Yes, a good point. Last call before the break. Michael in Dublin on the Clown Factory, otherwise known as Kamala Harris. Go ahead, Michael.
Thanks, George, to you and your staff for taking me on, and I want to compliment you again for expressing the frustrations of 9/10 of the population of the world about what's going on in Gaza. Yeah, with regard to Kamala, now, I'm not a big Kamala Harris fan, but the statement that she made, I think it was yesterday or the day before, about Gaza was quite a significant change. And she did refer dramatically to the children and the people being killed there. Now, I detect here. I mean, she's been at the butt of jokes, and to tell the truth, I've hardly ever heard her say anything that was sensible before. But she made a significant statement here. Now, it may have been written for her by somebody else, but it does indicate that the Biden administration is shattered by the change in the feelings of the people of America, and I think that this is going to have a significant effect. I think that they will be forced to actually tell Netanyahu to stop.
I think that's got to be our focus, Michael. I hate to break it to you, though she did make that statement yesterday, she has, in American parlance, walked it back today. She yesterday said that the United States would absolutely not permit the forcible relocation of the Palestinian population from Gaza. But today she said, we have no opinion on it, which rang a bell with me because the last American official who had no opinion on something was April Glaspie, the U.S. ambassador to Iraq, when she told Saddam Hussein that the United States had no opinion on Iraq's dispute with Kuwait. And we all know what happened next. The U.S. is falling apart on this. The administration is falling apart. It's bound to be, Michael. And we'll talk to Jackson Hinkle in a minute about this. But if a huge proportion of your own voters, huge proportion, is horrified at what you're doing, and you've got an election coming up less than 12 months from now, if you're not beginning to feel the strain, then you're actually a robot. You're artificial intelligence, though not very intelligent in Kamala's case. Thanks, Michael, as always. From Dublin, Jackson Hinkle from the US, coming up next. Stay tuned. You don't get to call me far right. You don't get to call me that on my own show. A lifelong socialist, the leader of a socialist party, the Workers' Party of Britain, with an Indonesian wife, with 5 mixed-race children, with a record of fighting racism all of my life, representing more people of colour in the British Parliament than anyone in history by a country mile. You don't get to call me far right. These kind of idiotic insults tossed around by infantile leftists who think that anyone to the right of them is a fascist, is a racist. They are the cause of the crashing and burning of what used to be called the left. They are the cause of it. They have discredited leftism with their foolish, idiotic isms and ists and smears that emanate from them like a bad smell.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, Jackson Hinkle is a bright star indeed, so much so that he'll be sitting in this chair on Wednesday when I cannot myself do the show. He's a stand-in extraordinaire and a great, great guest. Jackson, I want to start with the Joe Biden, Kamala Harris ticket. They're looking into the chasm of a very great defeat as a result of their policy towards what's happening in Gaza, aren't they?
100%. Thanks for having me on the show again. It's really quite incredible. You can't get the majority of Americans to agree on just about anything. Even if the sky is sunny and the clouds are cleared, there'd still be probably half of America that would tell you it's raining out. But when it comes to the issue of Gaza, well over half of America says that what we need to do is call for a ceasefire. 68% of Americans say that they don't support what Israel's doing right now. They support a ceasefire. Yet we don't live in a democracy. We live in this weird oligarchy controlled by banksters and the war companies. And that's why, even though we have so many Americans that agree on this, they are continuing to support Israel. And they're continuing to use our taxpayer money to fund the genocide and buy off all of the Arab Gulf states and prevent them from really doing anything of substance to aid the Palestinian resistance. So, yeah, it is a campaign catastrophe. I don't really know what the alternative is at this point. I mean, I think you can say Trump is a lesser of two evils on a lot of issues, but when it comes to Israel, he's they call him Zion Don for a reason, right? He's made some interesting statements a few weeks ago, but I don't think his policies are going to be all that different.
No, and in fact, we've got this weird, bizarre situation where the three leading candidates are in a kind of Dutch auction as to who's prepared to sacrifice the most for Netanyahu. Robert Kennedy, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. You're bound to ask the question. I asked it at the beginning. Why? Why are these politicians so infatuated with a far-off country, thousands of miles away, that most of them have no interest in truth? Why are they ready to sacrifice even their own electoral prospects for it? Has Israel got something on them or what?
That's a great question that I wish I knew the answer to. I've, like you, debated many Zionists, many Israeli government officials, even debated Israeli spy last week on Twitter. And I always come back to that question. Why is it so important for the U.S. to dump out our taxpayer base? Why is it so important to send all these weapons? Why is it so important? And this is one that really stumps them. Why is it so important for the United States and all these Western countries to offend the Arab states who are producing and control so much of the world's oil? It doesn't make any sense to me, but I guess, yeah, I mean, it's a combination of blackmail. It's a combination of these government officials seeing Israel as a proxy in an even more sincere way than they saw Ukraine as a proxy against one of their other enemies, Russia. And I just think you look at America today, or you look at the UK today, the average Joe who's coming home from work at 5, 6 p.m., he's making dinner for his family. He doesn't care about whether or not we send another $14 billion to Israel. If anything, I think his life would probably be better if our governments chose to spend that money on our own citizens. But then again, we don't live in a country where our governments actually care about us.
No, but as Dr. Johnson said, the knowledge that one is to be hanged in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. And Joe Biden's going to be hanged less than 1 year from now in an election. So do you think that the confused messaging from Dubai, from the mouth of Kamala Harris, means anything? She seemed to warn Israel that the United States, her word was absolutely will not permit the forcible relocation, the ethnic cleansing into the Sinai of the Gazan population, which she then walked back today. Is this governmental confusion or just that Kamala Harris is an idiot?
I think it's probably the latter. I don't think we've seen a single, administration in recent U.S. history that is filled with as many political gaffes day in and day out as the Biden-Harris administration. But what I do think is really interesting is right before we went live here, Al Jazeera reported that up to 70% of Israeli troops in the north of Gaza are currently withdrawing. And they said that this withdrawal began initially in the midst of the ceasefire that took place for about a week, but has increased in pace due to the resistance rockets that are firing on those Israeli soldiers. So, we talked about this when it began closer to October 7th, that it was not going to be pretty for the Israeli soldiers going in there. They had limited training. They are not deeply patriotic to the land for obvious reasons. And they're going up against some of the most patriotic people on the face of the planet, the Palestinian resistance, who've been preparing for this for years and who have created, not by their own doing, but by the doing, I guess, of these Israeli bombings. They have this haven of sniper nests, of areas in which, Viet Cong guerrilla warfare style fighting can thrive. And we all knew it was going to be really bad for the Israeli soldiers. And now we're beginning to witness it. So just like with Ukraine, we all ask the question, we know it's going poorly. How are they going to, where's the political off-ramp for the Western governments? How do they get out of this mess? I think we're now reaching a point in this war where government officials are having to ask that question again. Israel is a casualty-averse or casualty-phobic military. They don't like to get a lot of casualties whenever they get into a skirmish, and we've already seen a lot of them, so I think they're looking for an off-ramp.
Well, let's use that as a segue into the forgotten war, or at least the war they hope we'll forget. We committed suicide in Europe to follow Joe Biden over the cliff over Ukraine. We beggared our own economies. We destroyed our energy security. We made ourselves slave to American-supplied gas when we had a steady and much cheaper supply of Russian gas through the Nord Stream pipelines and other pipelines. We did all that. We gave, I've lost count, but it's scores of billions of dollars and euros in military aid to an army which is now almost in headlong retreat. It's perfectly possible that the Ukrainian army will collapse in the next days, if not hours, having fought bravely over many battles in Advika, the latest of those. They have effectively now been overwhelmed, and it will be up to the Russians to decide how far they're going to advance. How are we going to explain that one away, Jackson?
There's no explaining it away. Again, it's the same thing. Right on February 24th, all the conspiracy theorists, as they labeled us, all the Russian propagandists, turns out the Russian propagandists and conspiracy theorists have been right a lot recently. We all said, hey, look, this is only going to end in one way, and it's going to end however Russia wants it to end. And that was a grim reality for a lot of people in Western governments, but that was the stark truth. And now we're beginning to witness it. I mean, the footage that I know it's not in the press, it's not in the media, but the footage that we're seeing out of the battlegrounds in Avdiivka, for example, right now, I mean, it is just some of the most gruesome looking fighting I've ever seen in my life. I just saw that new Napoleon movie last night. It's not that good. I don't recommend anyone watch it. But in that movie, they focus a lot of time on the Battle of Austerlitz. And we all know that was horrific conditions when Napoleon fought the Russians there. And it was snowy, there was fog, it was horrible conditions, ice everywhere, probably the worst conditions you could fight a battle in. When I was watching the movie, I was like, am I watching the Ukraine War 2024 or am I watching Napoleon fight at Austerlitz? Because it really does look the same. And the Russians are taking an absolute and utter victory. And you're right, I have heard again that there's some sort of negotiations going on, backdoor negotiations between Ukraine and their, Western handlers and the Russians. And as we all expected, it's going to end with the annexation of Ukrainian territory, or some people might refer to it as the liberation of territory. And it's going to end with Russia basically deciding the terms of how it ends.
Yeah, and there's no explaining that. There's no explaining why we did all this to achieve nothing at all. It's a bit like, and I saw you peerlessly make the point, that we spent 20 years and $1 trillion or $2 trillion to put the Taliban back in power in Kabul. I mean, it's that level of military political disaster. And our media, of course, will never hold the politicians to account on that. In a sane world, all the talk shows would be saying to the governmental leaders, but you told us we had to do this and that we were winning, and that Hinkle and Galloway and the rest are all just agents of Putin. These are Putin talking points. Turns out we were the ones that were right.
Yeah, I mean, it is insane. It's like, this other point's been made. We've underestimated everyone. We underestimated Putin in Ukraine. We underestimated Russia and Syria when we funded all of our moderate rebels there. We underestimated the Taliban in Afghanistan. Now we're looking at this Palestinian resistance, and I think, again, we are underestimating what's happening there. No one ever learns. You said in a sane world, there'd be people in the press also explaining this information that is abundantly obvious. Well, in a sane world, we wouldn't have big pharma, massive corporations, the Wall Street hacks, and the military-industrial complex funding all of our media. We wouldn't have that, but that's what we have today. And that's why they say the things that they do, because if they happen to say any of the truth, they would be fired immediately.
Lastly, it's a bit esoteric, a bit of in-house, but I think you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh at what's happened to Mehdi Hassan, the correspondent on MSNBC, who sold everything, whose tongue was coated in boot polish for all the corporate boots that he licked, all the principles and previous positions that he abandoned, only to get sacked because he's mildly critical of Israel on MSNBC. That's got to be the nadir of U.S. journalism, surely.
100%. And people like Mehdi Hassan, when they get forced out eventually for just putting forward a modicum of truth, a tiny bit of truth, they're going to have no audience. They're going to have no one that follows them. They're going to have no one that cares about what they do next if they try to launch some show on X, because he's not a truth teller, as you put it. He sucked the corporate boots for as long as he could to get his multi-million-dollar shows. And what does he have left now? Nothing. But you look at Tucker Carlson, someone who pushed and shoved wherever he could to tell the truth, and people continue to follow him after the fact, regardless of what disagreements people might have with him. You have to respect that he did fight for the truth. So I'm not surprised to see the news about Mehdi Hassan. And yes, I do find it absolutely hilarious.
You think Tucker might end up on a ticket somewhere? He's actually far more eloquent persuader for that brand of politics than anybody else, including Trump.
Yeah, I'd love to see that. I love Tucker. I think, when Donald Trump bombed Qasem Soleimani, which was, an atrocious stain on his record and our country's history, I think, Tucker Carlson was the one going out on Fox News every night and pleading and begging with Trump and trying to reason with him not to start a full war with Iran. And he succeeded in that matter. So I think actually, if Tucker hypothetically was a vice president, I think he would be probably the best, mainstream influence that anyone could have on a Trump presidency.
Amen to that. Jackson, look forward to watching you in this spot on Wednesday. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Erobos, the legend in the United States, says Jackson has not sold out his integrity. Good for him. He absolutely has not. He's been crystal clear. Sometimes I shudder as to just how clear he is. And if he were listening to my advice, he might be just a little bit more subtle, but he is what he is. Jackson Hinkle is transparent and outstanding. Coming up, it's the legend that is Simon in Florida with his weekly roundup. But first, did you know that British naval officers had servants and that they were Chinese? You do now. Rum, sodomy and the lash, said Winston Churchill, was the lot of the only occasionally jolly Jack Tars afloat in Britain's Royal Navy. Britannia ruled the waves all right, but only in centuries gone by, and in part then through the press ganning of drunks on shore and the brutality outlined so piquantly by Churchill. Most, maybe all, of the old traditions sank with the seniority of the service after the Second World War and the general rundown of Britain's armed services as the sun set on the British Empire. But one tradition that remained, at least above decks, amongst the officer class, was the impeccable whites, starched and pressed, razor sharp, and of course the linen napkins in the officers' mess. But Britain last week learned the secrets of the ship's laundry. After 100 years lamented the Times and other august mouthpieces of the empire, Chinese servants were to be discontinued on Royal Naval ships for fear they would spy on the dirty laundry for their mother country. Who knew that in 2023 naval officers still had servants and that they were Chinese? The servants, as they were officially called, were in fact laundry workers. And so one can just imagine the kind of secrets they could have obtained from the Dobie room. I mean, if Beijing ever found out the secrets of the captain's underwear, it could be curtains for our chaps. Up the Yangtze without a paddle. One such servant was fired after 39 years of service. Why? Because he was Chinese, and the mainsail had been set against all things Chinese. Mind you, back in the Golden Age, nearly 7 years ago, the Chinese and Royal Navies were exchanging officer cadets and visiting each other's naval academies, although the Chinese had no plans to give their officers English servants. Today, the dirty little secret is that conflict with China is officially highly likely. And well, careless talk in front of the servants was thought unwise. Mind you, the last time the Royal Navy sailed up the Yangtze in the early days of the Chinese victory, back in 1949, the HMS Amethyst was sunk, and there's been a whole lot of laundry washed since then. Not to worry, Royal Navy officers will not have to wash and iron their own clothes in their brave new non-Chinese world. Heaven forbid. The role of servant in the Royal Navy will now be fulfilled by Gurkhas. Well, former colonial peoples just wash whiter, don't they? Now the poll, will Israel stop at? What will stop Israel? What's their end game? Is it ethnic cleansing? Is it genocide? Or will only an order from Biden stop them? That poll is running well, and the largest number of you think that only an order from Biden will stop it. But you've still got time to vote right up until about 10 to the hour. So you can vote on Telegram, on X, on the YouTube community stream, and on the YouTube stream itself. Our learned professor in Florida, Simon, always educates and illuminates, and I'm sure he will again right now. Simon, welcome back to the show. What's up?
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. Once again, you'll be glad to hear that I will be maintaining my reputation of not bothering you with trivia. I have an incredibly important story that, because it's occurred at the weekend, has gone very unnoticed. Obviously, with the terrible events in Gaza distracting the world. But the American Defense Secretary General Lloyd Austin, who not everyone will be aware was actually a four-star general before being given a waiver to move from the arms contractor Raytheon to take up his current position, has given the most nationalistic, bombastic, and jingoistic speech at the Reagan National Defense Forum in California yesterday. It seems that the Australian Defence Minister, your favourite British Minister, Mr. Shapps, or whatever else he happens to be going by this week, was also in attendance, along with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the top general of the American Armed Forces, and many members of Congress. He railed against essentially the Palestinians, speaking on behalf of Israel, Ukraine speaking against Putin, and also China, who he described as a coercive bully without a slight wisp of appreciation of the hypocrisy that he was engaging in. And at this point, he then said, not that America was in a battle of ideals, or that it was fighting for the future of the New World Order, or that it was trying to spread democracy. He, in fact, said that America is currently in a worldwide battle of the democracies versus the autocracies, ignoring, of course, the leadership of the entire Gulf Cooperation Council. And he then went on to say, quoting Biden, after quoting President Ronald Reagan 3 times, it was a truly bipartisan speech in that regard, repeating that he felt we were at an inflection point in history. And he said that the rules-based international order was designed, and this will make you chortle, so don't be drinking coffee at this point, to protect civilians and make sure that they are not targeted. That when you see what's happening in Gaza, just absolutely staggering that he would have said this less than a day ago. And he said that since 1945, America has ensured unprecedented peace and security worldwide. Apparently, the Vietnamese didn't receive that message. And he went on to say that the entire world was built by U.S. leadership and can only be maintained by U.S. leadership. And I'm afraid that one can only draw the conclusion, reading the transcript that was prepared, despite it being Saturday evening, by his underlings in the U.S. Department of Defense, a cropped video that was also posted on their website and is available for your worldwide audience to watch, just to verify that what I'm saying is not exaggerating at all. The transcript, unusually, also has breaks in it where it says crowd applause or other such descriptions, so that it's clear for people reading the transcript how well his speech was received. Now, the key point that Mr. Hinkle there, possibly with his young age, didn't quite appreciate is that the reason why we're not seeing an outbreak of peace yet is we've put hundreds of billions of dollars, partially to Ukraine and partially to the European and American defense establishment, to replace all of the stockpiles that have been sent to those 2 theaters of operations. But what the clamor is for now, and what Lloyd Austin, in the audience that included hundreds of American defense contractors, he explained that he wanted the congressman in the organization and in the audience there to make the necessary appropriations in order to rebuild the American defense base. And Ursula von der Leyen is pushing exactly the same thing with Jens Stoltenberg in Europe. And what they're trying to do is not simply replace what is being depleted, but to sign 7 to 10-year contracts so that companies like Boeing and Lockheed and Raytheon and Crooks can massively expand both their existing factories and build new factories on green sites, which isn't very environmentally friendly. And so that European funding is locked in for a decade. Once those contracts have been signed and there's no wiggle room, then we will transition to the reconstruction. And this week, you have the German Marshall Fund going around America on what they call their whistle-stop tour to try and drum up support for what will be a $1 trillion reconstruction budget. So there's initial military spending, everyone gets a medal. Then there's 10-year contracts, whether we're fighting or not, to fill up the warehouses for the next battle. And then there's the reconstruction, and there's all the grift and churn on all three levels. But what it looks like is Lloyd Austin intends to become president by being switched in at the Democrat convention, whilst the entire world is in turmoil. And the likes of you and I, he described in his speech, who might object to his schemes, he described as the ordinary people.
Well, I don't know if you quite grasp how dystopian a report that was of one of the spookiest of all the figures in the Biden administration. Truly horrific future that awaits us if we are prepared to go quietly into that good night. Simon in Florida, even more than usual. Thank you for that report. Comments on YouTube. Charterhouse Media says Biden played the banjo in Deliverance as a child actor. How wonderful is that? Angela Sharif says, if you know Gigi, it's only you and your insight that is keeping me going. I'm devastated by this genocide and even more by people's ignorance. People have a duty to understand the truth. How beautiful is that? Thank you, Angela. A retired rebel says, can you comment on Douglas McGregor's forecast of Erdogan joining a regional war after the second flotilla reaches the shores of Gaza and most likely will be fired upon by the occupation? We're going to get Colonel McGregor on the show pretty soon because he's impressing me a lot with the prescience, with the farsightedness of many of the conclusions that he's reaching. Let's go to, Gayatri, of course, will be up shortly. But first, let's talk to Kelly in South Wales on Palestine. Go ahead, Kelly.
Hiya, George. Nice to talk to you.
And you.
Well, first of all, I just want to say the mainstream media coverage has been so biased and, quite frankly, disgusting. But my call is, I'm appalled by our government not doing the job they were elected for, to speak for their constituents, ignoring public opinion, how they can look at the images of these dead children coming out of Gaza. It's horrifying. My every waking moment is consumed by the poor Palestinians. 75 years this has been going on. Before I go to bed, when I wake up, I'm on there looking. And this could have been a slam dunk for Starmer to oppose an elected Rishi and call for a ceasefire. He's the leader of the opposition, for God's sake. I've voted Labour for decades, so have my family, and I never will again. They keep saying the UK stand with Israel. I don't recall being asked. Wales have voted for a ceasefire. Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland have all voted for a ceasefire. They haven't asked us. I mean, as you know, Wales has always been red. I'll never vote for them again. I'll never forget this. I don't understand why would they be so steadfast in their support for a country in the Middle East. I don't understand it, George. I really don't understand it.
Neither do I, Kelly. All I can tell you is it's not sincere, which actually makes it worse rather than better, because I have been in the room when Keir Starmer, as long ago as 9 years ago, called for Israel to be kicked out of FIFA, the International Football Association, kick racism out of FIFA. I was there. He was on the platform speaking, denouncing Israel and its crimes. And 9 years later, he's prepared to risk everything, including the safety of our own people here at home, our safety from terrorism, from ultra-radicalization that must be going on right now. Why would he do that? It's not as if he actually genuinely believes in it. And that's why I'm asking the question I asked Jackson. Has Israel got something on these people? What is it? Is it the donations that they've had from Israel lobbyists and so on? What is it? If it's not sincerity, what is it? But I think that what you've just said is a clarion call that will echo everywhere in Britain. Nobody who can vote with a clear conscience for Keir Starmer after everything that he has done and is still doing, is doubling down on. Who? What kind of person? Could anyone who regarded themselves as a socialist vote for him? As a Christian? As a Muslim? As a Labour man or woman? Who could vote for him? It is actually political suicide. And I aim to ensure that he pays the maximum price for it. Kelly, thanks for that call. Old Biker says Hamas is underground. So why is Israel leveling Gaza buildings? Good point. If all the land was given to Abraham, then why did Abraham purchase a grave from someone else on the same land that he owns? And Logman Salim says, what's the cost of the war financially? How healthy is the Israeli economy? How healthy is the economy of those countries who are supporting Israel? Brilliant, brilliant point. George is in Italy, but wants to talk about Palestine. This is the Global University of the Airwaves. George, welcome.
Hello, George. Good day to you, George, and thank you for taking the call. And if I may call you dear friend, I take the chance to call you if that's okay.
Welcome, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. George, I've been listening to you for a long time, and I've taken the time, let's say the courage now to give you a call because you're very intelligent, and also the people that you speak to and your guests, extremely intelligent. But there's one thing that seems to be missing, and I say so provocatively in good faith, that it seems that you do not understand, or those do not understand the real problem of what is really going on, what is really demonically going on. And I say this because I think you're saying that to also be a little bit provocative. But the elephant in the room, George, is religion. If I can use that word without getting you deplatformed. What is happening today is genocidal Zionist religion, Torah-based. I don't want to use the word Jewish because that could get you deplatformed, or it could seem that we're always being anti-Semites. But Zionism is Jewish-based religion. It's Torah taught in the Bible. And what I don't understand is why we do not mention that word, while it's perfectly okay to mention that Islam is the bad religion, is the bad teaching, is the violent teaching. When what is happening now with your new number of 6,000 children being killed is Zionist Torah-based warfare. This is what I don't understand.
I don't mention it, George, not because I'd be deplatformed if I did, but because I don't agree with it. I know personally dozens of devoted, learned, erudite rabbis who have explained to me, and they'll explain to any one of you that wants to look them up. Rabbi Weiss, for example, been on this show. I've traveled with him in buses into Gaza. These are the real Jews. They're the real religious Jews. They're the people who believe in the Torah. Netanyahu doesn't give a damn about religion. None of these Zionist leaders were religious at all, including Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement. He was an avowed atheist. All these leaders of the Zionist movement and all the leaders of the revisionist trend, the Jabotinsky trend, which led to Begin and Shamir and Sharon and now Netanyahu, these are atheist people. They're not doing what they do because they're following the religion of Judaism. They despise all religion. They do what they do because they are an extreme right, fascistic, ultra-nationalist movement. And that's why it is not anti-Semitism to attack them, to oppose them, because it is not true that they are acting on behalf of the Jews in the world or that they are acting according to their religious faith. So it's not that I'm hiding from it, it's that I don't agree with it. But you were welcome to express a contrary view. A quick break and then I get to see my wife. How about that then? Stay tuned.
As the green smoke rose, their faces flashed out, pallid green, and faded again as it vanished. Then slowly the hissing passed into a humming, into a long, loud, droning noise. Suddenly, a humped shape rose out of the pit, and the ghost of a beam of light seemed to flicker out after it. Forthwith, flashes of actual flame, a bright glare leaping from one to another, sprang from the scattered group of men. It was as if some invisible jet impinged upon them and flashed into white flame. It was as if each man were suddenly and momentarily turned to fire.
So follow me on Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Will cost you less than the price of a cup of tea per week in an insalubrious cafe. This famous insalubrious cafe of which I speak. I was in one this very day. And you get both of the films that you've seen referred to tonight, Killing Kelly and The Killings of Tony Blair. You get me reading the impeccable War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. You get all kinds of content. And I need it. I need your support on it. So I hope that's enough to persuade you to sign up to patreon.com/George Galloway. Will Israel stop at ethnic cleansing? Will they go all out for genocide? Or will they only be stopped by an order from Biden? You've got about another 5 minutes max to get your vote in on all the different platforms. But let's get a roundup of what's been said on social media about the show tonight. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Lots of emails here, so I will read you them out because they're all very concrete questions. Okay. Starting with this one from Christian. Hi, George. I watch your show every week, but I feel there is a subject yet to be talked about or investigated, and that is BlackRock. If it wasn't for them, then none of these modern wars would have happened. They own everything, invest in everyone. They have created ESG ratings, and they buy up all the housings. And they have shares in all the major companies. They even invest in Chinese companies that no one else can invest in. So why do we not talk more about them? Maybe Palestinian people would be living in less fear if they did not rule. Thank you, from Christian.
I personally doubt it. Of course, the BlackRock of which you speak is a deeply pernicious, piratical, capitalistic entity, of course. But if it was not them, it would be somebody else. It literally would be somebody else. BlackRock is an excrescence that emerges from the, if I can continue the anatomical metaphor, that emerges from the bowels of the capitalist system. I'm more than happy to feature BlackRock as a subject on the Mother of All talk shows. Let's look for an expert on their activities, and we'll surely do that. Thanks, Christian, for that mail.
Yeah, let's do that indeed. This one is from John in Hong Kong. He says, I could not answer the poll as I believe only the intervention of military brute force by another power or powers can stop this biblical industrial wholesale slaughter of human. May the gods adore you for providing us this extraordinary platform. So thank you, John, for that.
Thank you, John, yes.
This is a question from Ben. He says, hi, George. Has your stance on RFK Jr. changed in recent months? I hope, God, that this conflict in Palestine has ended before the next presidential election. But if it hasn't, is RFK Jr. still the best available? If not,
no.
Who?
No. I did say, I announced, insofar, if that's not too vainglorious, what does my opinion matter? But I stated that having been head over heels with his candidature, his crazed, shameless, shameful performance as a toady of the worst elements of Zionist aggression and genocidal violence, I could not possibly encourage anyone to vote for him. But that's the problem that Jackson Hinkle identified, that, you know, Joe Biden, Donald Trump, RFK Jr., it would be difficult to decide which of those three was a more foaming at the mouth fanatic for genocide. So that only leaves Dr. Jill Stein, the Green Party candidate, who I supported in 2016 and will have to support again now. We met her, of course, Gayatri.
Yes.
We had her on our show. We had her on
Yeah.
Sputnik, if we're allowed to mention Sputnik any longer. Go ahead.
Yes. So this one is from Quebec in Canada. Hi, George. In the opening of the show, you made a comment on the increase of the Muslim terrorist attacks in the West. Well, he asked, is this not unfair for the Muslims/Arabs? And is it not a motive for Islamophobia/racism against them?
Yeah, but you can't avoid the fact that they are happening and that they are likely to happen. Of course, I'm first in the ranks of those fighting against racism and against Islamophobia. I've represented more Muslims in the British Parliament than anyone else in the whole history of this country. I'm a champion of those communities. But there exists a terrorist danger. In Paris this evening, in London next week, in Dublin last week, because a section of the Muslim community may turn out to be so raging mad at what's going on that they seek to make entirely innocent people who may even have been on the marches against this genocide pay for the crimes of Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. And I'm appealing to everyone to turn their faces away from that practice. But I'm not likely to succeed with everyone any more than I was able to succeed in 2005 on 7/7, when hundreds of innocent people were murdered and maimed in those terrorist attacks. Next, Gayatri.
Well, you're talking about people being outraged, and people are expressing, in every way how it obviously haunts them in their sleep. All the images that they're seeing. What was it? You said 1,000 Palestinians have been killed
1,000 dead in 36 hours.
36 hours. I mean, how can it not drive you insane? So Ted writes, "Dear George, are you aware that a protester set themselves on fire outside the Israeli consulate in Atlanta, Georgia?" In solidarity from Ted. I mean, these news,
and
I
don't know. Did she lose her life? I don't know if she died, but she set herself on fire. Self-immolation has a long history, of course. Happened in Vietnam, happened in Korea. Self-immolation in protest, a monstrous crime that is being committed, has a long history. It broke my heart to read about it. I haven't read if she perished or survived. And we don't want people to be doing these things, no matter how enraged they're feeling. We want them, and we have a chance this year coming up to use their political power, their ballot, their democratic power, to remove these criminals from office. And this is a special year, 2024, on both sides of the Atlantic. We have that opportunity. Let's take it. Last one, Gayatri.
Last one. Epstein's Island has made a lot of men bend the knee, but hubris and arrogance combined gave us our living devils. This genocide of Palestinians in Gaza represents what these maniacal fools will do to all of us that resist. I feel that prejudice does not just apply to Muslims, but anyone that stands in their way. COVID was a test, and so is this tragedy. If the world does not come forth immediately and force a ceasefire and a two-state solution, the neocons left and right will not stop. If justice is not meted out and the ledger wiped clean, God will have no mercy. You ask how these leaders can commit political suicide. Well, I'll tell you, it's easy. There is no accountability, and a high-paying job awaits them. Respectfully, Stephen Rowland.
Well, Stephen, I wish I could disagree with that, but I'm struggling to find the words to do so. Thanks very much, Gayatri. Thanks to all your correspondents. Let's take some quick calls before the end of the show. The legend, Sarkar in Glasgow. On you go, Sarkar.
Good evening, George. See, for the past 3 weeks, I've been really distressed with everything what is going on in the world. And I'll be honest, today when Keir Starmer praised Thatcher, believe me, I don't know what else can be done. But I must say, in British politics, there are three politicians whom I've always listened to. Tony Benn, the great George Galloway, and of course, one of the greatest politicians, Michael Foot. I'll be honest, George, this is with regards to what I'm seeing in the Dutch elections. I'll be honest, I totally don't believe that a guy like Geert Wilders could win so many seats in Netherlands with his repugnant views and racist views. But I'll tell a small thing, George. You know what happened a year and a half ago? I was in Amstelveen. The so-called liberal politicians have told us farmers to stop farming. They kept on poking the normal working-class people in their eyes to such an extent that when you stop people from living their lives the way they do, they automatically get attracted to a right-wing party. It's reflected in Italy. It's reflected in Netherlands. They told farmers to stop farming. So why? Because of some climate change agenda. Now, this man, who, believe me, is nothing short of, insanity, this Gert Wilders guy. Think of the plight of those common men who feel when our own politicians are mocking us, poking us in the eye, they lecture every other country on democracy, go and bomb every other country, but our own working class people, they tell them, you cannot do this, you cannot drive your car this way. These people automatically get attracted to a right-wing party. And I'll be honest, I'm not surprised that Le Pen, Orban, Meloni, all of them congratulated them. This is all a mistake of our stupidity of all the Western so-called liberal governments who are obsessed with genders and everything, but have forgotten the plight of the common man. This is a very scary trend, George. Believe me.
I couldn't put it better than that. Certainly not more passionately than that. This is a measure of the collapse of the centre, the collapse of so-called social democracy, the collapse of liberalism, which has comprehensively failed, which has pursued the fool's gold of wokery to the point that they have broken themselves. The Social Democrats in Italy were defeated by Meloni. The Social Democrats in the Netherlands were defeated by Wilders. The Social Democrats in France will be defeated by Le Pen. The Social Democrats in Germany will be defeated by the AfD. Except in Germany, there is a hope that Sarah Wagenknecht and her new party, offering a radical but not liberal socialist alternative, may be able to stem the tide. But Schulz is a dead duck. He's currently at 12% in the national opinion polls. Bonkers Baerbock on 13%, the Green leader. Social democracy has completely failed, and worse than failed, it has pursued these idiotic wild goose chases, net zero, rip out your boiler, scrap your car, even though I'll fly on an aircraft all the way to Dubai to talk about why you should eat bugs, why you should scrap your motor car, why you have to rip out your boiler and replace it with a less efficient heat pump, why you need to get used to living colder in the winter, why you need to de-industrialize, why you need to become a post-industrial society. That's what they're doing right now in Dubai. These social democrats, with their pursuit of greenery, quackery, wokery, have driven their population mad. And now their politics is a dirty word in Europe. People despise it because they know that it represents everything that they are not and the things that they do not believe in. And unless there's an alternative, as I hope to be in Britain, as Sarah is in Germany, unless there's an alternative, of course, people like Wilders, Le Pen, the AfD will come to power. It'll be change, but it'll be change even for the worse in many cases. But you could hardly blame people for taking the opportunity of change. David is in Swindon. Let's hear from him. Go ahead, David.
Oh, no, I've only got 3 minutes. Yeah, I want to take you back to about 4 weeks ago when you mentioned the United Nations, and my comment is, United Nations, what is it good for? Absolutely nothing. You mentioned if the United Nations was a golf club, do you remember?
Yeah.
And Israel and America were members, they would have been kicked out by now.
Yeah.
They're cheats and liars. What I'm trying to say is the United Nations needs to grow some and split. It needs to split along the rule-based order countries, which is about 2 billion people, and the others, which is about 6 billion. Okay, and the only way this is going to get solved.
I agreed with it then. I agree with it now. It's a question of the modalities of how that happens, and I believe that BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization are the rudiments of what will become a new United Nations. Go ahead. Last word.
Away from the dollar, the pound, the euro, pound dollar, the oil dollar. And we need a split. I said to you, I would gladly pay £20 a litre for petrol if it meant that Rishi Sunak gave in. The only way we're going to do this is economic. We need, like the Straits of Hormuz, we need an oil crisis to solve this.
Okay, David, thanks for the call. Do call back again. We'll prioritise your call as you didn't get much time. But I have to have the legend, Norma in Bristol, as our last caller. Go ahead, Norma.
Hello, George. You give us so much to think about, and I do wonder why, like you say, why is this all allowed to happen? But listening to Simon from Florida made me think, and it's only my fault, but I've just come to the conclusion that power and money only matter. Forget about the genocide. They don't care. That was my thought.
They don't, Norma. They're demonic, frankly. Lloyd Austin is a demonic figure, straight out of Central Casting.
Yeah.
And so is Starmer, you know.
Yeah.
I feel particularly about him because he's supposed to be the leader of the opposition. He's supposed to be the leader of a so-called Labour Party. But mainly because I know that he doesn't even believe in it. Because I've heard him just a few short years ago say the absolute opposite. He's a liar and a hypocrite. And I'm determined to beat him, Norma. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Last word.
Yeah, but I know what you're saying. Actually, I think he's got very big connections to Israel with his wife and family. But if you don't get PR, and I hope that one day we will, but we won't soon, not for a while, these small parties would have got seats and would have got them in the future, but we won't, you see, and nothing seems to come right nowadays.
Well, we won't until we will. You see, big parties can become small very quickly. In my lifetime, PASOK, the Papandreou Socialist Party, was the governing party, the party of government in Greece. And now it doesn't exist. In my lifetime, the Socialist Party in France, the party of Mitterrand, the party of Hollande, and of Strauss-Kahn, and these kind of figures, was regularly in power in the Élysée with a majority in the National Assembly. And now they scarcely exist. They scarcely register on the radar. So big parties can become small, and small parties can become big. Wilders was once a one-man band, and now he's the top of the heap in the Netherlands. Small parties can become big, big parties can become small. If everybody that wants change votes for change, we'll get change. But if they say fatalistically that there's no point, that these demons rule the world and will continue to rule the world, they will continue to rule the world. We've got a chance in 2024 to vote them out in London, in the UK, in the United States. It's up to all of us to make sure that we do everything that we can to make it happen. Norma, thank you as always for your call, and thank you, the audience, for being with me on what I hope you will agree was an important, if not momentous, day in which we reflected on the biblical, Old Testament genocide and slaughter of the innocents that we have all been watching. And I hope I have left you with the belief that something can be done about it. It is being done by the Palestinians who are resisting it, and it must be done in the Western countries that are making these crimes possible. I can't tell you how angry I am that the Royal Air Force that saved us in 1940, in 1941, in the Battle of Britain. Those pilots, those uniforms, those British aeroplanes that fought fascism, and without whom fascism would have prevailed and ruled us. That same Air Force is this day flying over Gaza, providing spying data to the killers in Tel Aviv, the killers in Netanyahu's cabinet. I can't tell you just how much that hurts me. Thanks very much for watching. 18,213 people voted. Most of you think that only Biden can stop this. And the next most would be, I'm afraid it's polar opposite, that it won't be stopped at all, and that it will end in genocide if Netanyahu is allowed to carry it out. I'll not be here on Wednesday, but Jackson Hinkle will be in my stead. I hope that you will tune in at the later time of 9 p.m. UK time to hear Jackson Hinkle and the inimitable mother of all talk shows. Thanks for watching.